My dad left school when he was 14, mainly because his family were poor factory workers, and I guess he just didn't see much point continuing. He was a pretty good boxer, but he got his fingers cut off in a factory when he was 17. He got a lot of compensation, but with that money, he just decided to leave the country and travel to India. And he travelled a lot after that. He returned to England when he was in his 30s with no significant work experience or education at all. But he returned with my mum, who was descended from an Amazonian tribe. She lived on a very small, remote settlement in the Amazon. She had quite a privileged upbringing because her family owned the only shop on the settlement and they had a large plantation. But she'd also left school pretty early at about 11, and she was only 18 when she left Guyana forever with my dad. And until that point, she'd never left the Amazon. So they arrived in Basildon, which was predominantly white, working class, housing commission type area. And it was a difficult place to live if you weren't those things. My parents both understood the value of an education, primarily because they had to really struggle without. So they encouraged me to study, which I did. And at the time, I didn't really see that my parents were sort of just drifting apart, and they broke up. And at that point, I was about 8. My dad put a lot of pressure on me to pass a national entrance exam to go to a selective school in another town. I had to be in the top 1% to get a place there, so he started me on pass papers when I was 8, but the test wasn't until when I was 11. Primary school was pretty horrible. Kids from other schools would show up with like cricket bats and other weapons to fight us, and I took part in that. I guess because I was angry after my parents broke up, and that became part of my identity. So, as far as the school was concerned, out of nowhere, I got a place at Westcliff High School for boys. I was suddenly like a small brown kid with a poor, uneducated people's accent, and I felt really ashamed that we were poor and that my dad was a postman, and I never told anybody where my mum was from. I think from the get-go my accent marked me as coming from a bad area, and it automatically marked me as maybe like a little bit stupid and definitely a troublemaker. And I'd never done any homework up until that point or written anything other than a story, never studied science. So I was immediately behind and I was immediately an outsider, and I think a lot of teachers just closed the door on me. I consistently got bad grades, which I couldn't understand. I was doing everything that I was asked to, but I lived in a small flat with my dad, and he was never there during the weeknights, so I was just doing it alone. And I was told that I needed elocution and that I should play cricket to learn discipline. Well, I was the captain of the basketball team, but it was made abundantly clear that that was the wrong sport to play. At 15, the school basketball team was disbanded because there wasn't time for it, apparently. And for me, honestly, that was heartbreaking. And it was the only thing I did outside of the art class that any teacher seemed to appreciate. But look, my dad bought me all the revision guides, and I did a lot of revision at home, skipped classes, and to everyone's surprise, at 16 I was one of the top performing students. But I think the damage was already done because I'd consistently been graded as a failure and painted as a troublemaker. And also, we'd already chosen our subjects for the final 2 years of school prior to those exams based on predicted grades. And mine were mostly very low predictions, so just backed into a corner where I had to choose art, biology, and chemistry. And art was the only subject from those three that I enjoyed because it was like an escape, I guess. I basically stopped studying and caring from that point on, and at 17 I became really unhappy and increasingly withdrawn. And it was as if I'd realised that making any effort at all was futile. I became reckless, interested in extreme sports, and started drinking a lot. And I despised all authority. I ended up doing the bare minimum, got poor grades in science. Ironically, I got to study biology at a very good uni because at the interview they liked that I'd taken art. However, I never liked biology. I never wanted to do it. Really, I just wanted my dad to be happy, and he was when I went to uni, but could never really shake my own unhappiness. On paper now, I'm quite successful, I suppose. I'm teaching at Sydney Uni, and I was a pro BMX rider, and everything looks fine, but underneath the surface is still that sad person.